Hi, fourth graders. This is day 4 of our Liberty Tree reading. We are going to start today off with lobster backs, right where we left off after tar and feathers. Lobster backs. On Friday, September 30th, 1768, Paul Revere wrote, "The ships of war arrived. The soldiers landed on Long Wharf. They formed and marched with insolent parade, drums beating, fifes playing, up King Street. The sun shone on their brightly polished boots and shining muskets. The redcoats were an impressive sight. But it wasn't all comfortable to be a British soldier. Their red wool jackets were hot and itchy. Their white pants were so tight that they had to be put on wet. Then, as they dried, they got even tighter and pinched cruelly. A redcoat had to pass inspection each morning. Washing wasn't necessary, but he had to shave. He had to clean and polish his boots, buttons, and buckles. Then he braided his hair in a long pigtail, powdered it with white flour, and dipped the end in animal grease. He smelled awful. Soldiering was a terrible life. Redcoats were paid only about 8 pence, equal to only 2 cents. That's 2 pennies a day. If they didn't keep their uniforms clean, they were whipped. A soldier who tried to desert, that means to run away, was likely to be executed. Sometimes he had to stand next to his coffin while the firing squad took aim at him. And if he escaped, Indians might be sent after him with orders to bring back his scalp. Life in the British Army was difficult, and redcoats were certainly not welcomed in Boston. Girls turned up their noses, men sneered, and little boys ran after groups of red-jacketed soldiers screaming, "Lobster backs! Bloody backs! Go home!" So people in America do not want to see the British soldiers going around giving anybody orders. But we're learning that life as a British soldier wasn't that easy. Pause the video now and jot down, why was life hard for these British soldiers? Why was life hard for these British soldiers? Sometimes a married redcoat was allowed to bring his wife and children along. They were given a small amount of food. In return, the women cooked, washed, and nursed sick and wounded men. Whenever the redcoats moved to a new camp, their families went with them. Little children were often present when bloody battles took place. The cat of 9 tails was a whip made of 9 knotted ropes or leather thongs fastened into a handle. Soldiers were punished by being whipped on their bare backs. The uniform wasn't the only discomfort a redcoat endured. He had to carry all his belongings into battle with him. Besides his musket balls, and bayonet, he carried a knapsack stuffed with food, blankets, and camping gear. It was a heavy load. Redcoats received very low pay. To earn extra money, some hired themselves out to farmers and storekeepers in their free hours. Life was not easy to be a British soldier in America. The Boston Massacre. Lobsters, lobsters for sale. Every time a redcoat walked through the streets of Boston, he heard angry jeers. Sometimes he felt a quick push from behind and a splat. He found himself face down in a pile of garbage. The redcoats began to hate Boston and everyone in it. The townspeople hated them right back. British soldiers infuriated the people of Boston by gambling, drinking, and holding noisy parades on the Sabbath. Finally, on March 5th, 1770, the situation exploded. It was a dark night, cold and snowy. A soldier was standing guard in the sentry box in front of the customs house. A boy came along and began shouting insults at him. The soldier dashed out of his box and hit the boy with his musket. The boy ran away crying. But soon he came back with friends. They threw snowballs at the guard and screamed, "Lousy rascal, bloody back!" A crowd began to gather. The meeting house bell tolled. Men ran through the streets calling, "Town born, turn out!" This cry was usually raised to call townspeople to help fight a fire. In fact, some people thought there was a fire. They rushed out of their houses carrying buckets of water. Others were ready to fight. They grabbed fence railing and rocks and ran toward the custom house. So right now, this group of young boys were making fun of a soldier, and the soldier ended up going back at them. Now the crowd is growing bigger, bigger, and bigger. The terrified sentry shouted for help. Captain Thomas Preston hurried to his side with 7 redcoats. They loaded their muskets, lowered their bayonets, and faced the angry crowd. "Go home!" Captain Preston yelled. The sentry was only doing his duty, but the crowd screamed insults at the soldiers and pressed closer. Someone smashed a club across Preston's arm. Rocks flew. Suddenly, a shot rang out, then another. A man in the crowd dropped down dead. Preston ran among his men, striking up their guns and yelling at them to stop firing. But when the smoke cleared and the crowd withdrew, 3 men lay dead and 2 more were dying. Boston would long remember this terrible night. Take a quick pause and read these 2 captions. One is about Crispus Attucks, and the other one is about Matthew Kilray and Hugh Montgomery. Great. After you've read it, unpause. We'll read one more caption. The redcoats and their officers were bombarded with snowballs stuffed with ice or bits of broken oyster shells. Each year after the Boston Massacre, the people of Boston marked its anniversary with prayers for the dead and angry speeches against the British. A large meeting was planned for the 5th anniversary. The British officers decided that they would not tolerate strong speeches against their country. They made a plan. A young British officer was to bring an egg to the meeting. If the speeches were unacceptable, he would throw the egg at a woman in the audience. That would be the signal for other British officers to arrest the colonist leaders. Unfortunately for the British, the young officer fell on his way to the meeting and broke the egg. No one was arrested. Thank you so much for reading along with me for day 4. The notes that you should have jotted down are: how were the lobsterbacks mistreated, or what made being a British soldier so difficult? And you should have some notes jotted down about the captions you read on your own. Join us for our last day Friday to read Rally Mohawks. Bye!